You're shorter.
Well, good morning, all. So great to see you. Is this thing on? I suppose it is. On December 23rd of last year, Democrats voted for a $1.7 trillion blowout known as the omnibus. Just 2 weeks later, 2 weeks after that, the point is they knew. 2 weeks after that, on January 13th, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen informed America that our debt had reached its statutory limit. The point is that this current debt crisis has been created solely by reckless Democrat policies and out-of-control spending. However, America will not default on our debts unless President Biden chooses to do so. To ensure America does not default on our debts, the House Freedom Caucus is offering a responsible solution to this self-imposed crisis. Members of the House Freedom Caucus who have never voted for continual debt ceiling increases will support a solution to responsibly address the impending debt ceiling crisis. Simply put, the plan is to shrink Washington and grow America. To shrink Washington, we save money now by ending President Biden's $400 billion student loan bailout. We rescind all unobligated COVID-19 funds. We recoup the $80 billion in IRS expansion funds, and we recoup billions of dollars of wasteful climate change spending in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, and by finding every single dollar spent by Democrats that can be reclaimed for the American taxpayer. Doing this will lower dollar for dollar the amount needed for any increase in the debt ceiling. It's actually what families across America who find themselves overextended must do. To shrink Washington also means ensuring a strong military while returning to pre-pandemic non-defense spending levels. By keeping future top-line discretionary spending at the FY22 level for 10 years, we cut $131 billion in FY24 and save roughly $3 trillion over the long term by cutting the wasteful, woke, and weaponized federal bureaucracy. When we shrink Washington this way, it enables Congress to use the appropriations process to address the many abuses and disasters caused by the Biden administration, such as the chaos at our southern border, the COVID vaccine mandates and associated discriminatory policies, and the unconstitutional ATF rule, just to name a few. Importantly, spending for the next 10 years at the FY22 levels puts our budget on a path to balance while protecting Social Security, retirement, and Medicare benefits. Because solving our debt problem must include a strong economy that reflects the work ethic and determination of the American people, the next part of the Freedom Caucus plan is to grow America. We grow America by enacting major policy changes and reforms to the wasteful, woke, and weaponized federal bureaucracy, including but not limited to curtailing burdensome regulations by ensuring congressional approval under the REINS Act, unleashing the production of reliable domestic energy by ending unnecessary federal regulations and subsidies, by restoring Clinton-era work requirements on welfare programs, and by passing a preemptive continuing resolution with non-defense discretionary spending restored to the pre-COVID FY 2019 level to force Congress to do its work and pass appropriations in a timely manner. We can solve our debt crisis responsibly if we shrink Washington and grow America. Members of the House Freedom Caucus are ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work voting now on these proposals, and we're willing to do it today. I now recognize the House Freedom Caucus Policy Chairman, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Chip Roy.
Well, thank you, Chairman Perry. Thank you to all my colleagues for standing here in defense of the American people. President Biden released his budget yesterday. His budget makes his priorities clear. His administration is at war with the American people's freedom and prosperity. We need to shrink Washington and grow America. His budget would do the opposite. Biden proposes $3 trillion in tax increases and price controls. We can save more than that by cutting, as Scott just outlined, the woke, weaponized federal bureaucracy that's at odds with the American people. Think about this. Biden's budget would massively increase funding across the board for that wasteful federal bureaucracy targeting the American people. More funding to a Department of Homeland Security that refuses to actually secure the homeland, leaving the American people vulnerable to fentanyl to the tune of 72,000 dead Americans. More for an ATF to turn law-abiding American citizens into felons for simply having weapons that are currently lawful in an unconstitutional power grab by the bureaucracy. More funding for an FBI to make people like Scott Smith a domestic terrorist, or Mark Houck a target of the federal FBI, having a SWAT team show up at his home in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. More funding for CMS to enforce tyrannical vaccine mandates. More funding for a Department of Defense that has some of our men and women in uniform still wondering if they can have the promotion or advance in their career because they dared to stand up to the vaccine tyranny authored and promoted by Anthony Fauci. More funding for agencies like the EPA to push anti-human, unreliable energy policies that are sending us backwards, making it harder for us to compete with China. More funding for a woke, weaponized government with government-wide diversity indoctrination. The DEI demands that President Biden literally just ordered by executive order. More funding for abortion and transgender policies. Look, his budget proposes a $3 trillion tax hike. We think we should do the opposite. We think we should be pulling government back, getting out of the way of the American people, letting them create growth and opportunity for their kids and grandkids. And if you create economic growth, you can actually grow out of the debt that we face. It is the only way to save this country and to advance America is to stop spending money we don't have for the very tyranny the American people sent us here to stop. We believe we can do that. Scott outlined it. I don't need to repeat it too much, but just understand. We can save over $3 trillion over the next decade by putting that spending for the federal bureaucracy back to pre-COVID levels. Now I ask you, who among us think that the size of government in 2019 was really small and efficient and effective? Anybody? Anybody want to sign up and say, man, that government, man, they were really nailing it. They were really efficient and effective. How about, is it better now, bloated with all the COVID spending? All we're asking is to take that bureaucracy down the street, return it to pre-COVID levels, and then have a simple growth over the next 10 years and be able to sustain our government at the level it should be and save $3 trillion. President Biden wants to tax us into oblivion, regulate us into oblivion. We're standing against that. And I've got one final point. Our job here is to defend the American people. Don't make any mistake about what we're saying. This government is at odds, at war with the American people and living free. We have constituents coming up to us every single day telling them horror stories about how they're being targeted and regulated. Someone who was actually put in jail because there was water on his ranch in Montana, and he went to jail for 18 months and died before the court could hear the case. Who wants a government that is putting an American citizen in jail because he has water on his land? It's absolutely extraordinary what we've allowed to happen in empowering this federal government at odds with the American people. We stand against that. That's why we were sent here. We are called the House Freedom Caucus for a reason. We stand for freedom. With that, I'll turn it over to my friend, Ms. Boebert from Colorado.
Good job. Good morning. None of us who are here today standing on this stage have voted for the reckless spending that has us off a cliff right now, defaulting on our nation's debt. We are here to ensure that we do not default on our nation's debt. And the question that we all face isn't what was the financially responsible thing to do last year. No, in the last Congress, we fought like hell to make sure that we weren't spending recklessly here in Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, we did not have the power of the pen, we did not have the power of the gavels, and we certainly did not have the power of the purse under Democrat rule. The question is not what are we going to do in 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years from now. The question is, what can we do today? This is the Congress that Republicans have the majority in, and we have a financial crisis that is approaching, and we have all been wrestling with the same question. How are we going to fix this? Well, the House Freedom Caucus is here to set a marker, to say we do have solutions. There are things that we can do in this Congress to fix Washington's debt, to begin this trajectory to shrink government and grow America. The House Freedom Caucus's proposal, which was released this morning, will shrink Washington. It will grow America. And we do this by rescinding unobligated COVID funds, repealing Biden's unconstitutional loan forgiveness program. We do this by saving $400 billion and that promise that he made to students with their debt. We do this by reclaiming monies from the so-called Inflation Reduction Act. I serve on the House Natural Resources Committee, and it is astonishing how many Democrats begin their arguments when it comes to our nation's energy with the Inflation Reduction Act. All of us were touting that the IRA did nothing to reduce inflation. It increased inflation, and in fact, it was just another Democrat con game where they title a bill one way and it does something completely different. It is the Green New Deal, and we want to take back those hundreds of billions of dollars that was unjustly advertised to the American people as something that would actually help them financially in their pocketbooks at home. We proved at the beginning of the year that when you stand on principle, you can deliver amazing wins for the American people. We fought to have the tools to do what we are doing today. And it's time that we stop bragging about our tools, admiring our tools, and actually get some nicks in them. Actually use the tools that we fought so hard for House Republicans to have in this Congress, and we save the American people in the process. I'm honored to stand here with my colleagues in the House Freedom Caucus today. And I yield to my good friend Bob Good from Virginia.
Thank you for being here today. You know, the colleagues standing with me, most of them were part of the effort that we had 2 months ago where we made history, where members of Congress, for the first time in 160 years, were willing to challenge, to hold accountable their own party's leadership and to try to work to bring transformative change to how Congress operates. You're going to see us make history again in this new Congress where we're going to actually cut spending in a meaningful way and put us on a path to fiscal stability as a nation. You know, you look at what the president has done. Here we are with $32 trillion in national debt, equates to about $100,000 per citizen, $10 trillion in new spending in the first 2 years of a presidency, never happened before in the history of the country. And how does the president respond? The president responds with a $6.9 trillion largest budget proposal in the history of the country that would project to a $2 trillion deficit, $2 trillion more than $4.9 trillion in revenue that's currently coming into the Treasury. That's the president's response. His response is $20,000 per American citizen in spending in the coming year. Think about it. How many Americans would say they would vote for us to borrow and spend $20,000 in their name, in the name of every member of their family? Who would vote for that? We don't have to go back very far to get to a path to fiscal balance with our country. As others have said, if you just go back to pre-COVID spending, we were spending $4.4 trillion for this bloated, inefficient, ridiculously funded federal government just pre-COVID, $4.4 trillion. With the Trump tax cuts and the economic growth that we were enjoying until this president, we now have been realizing $4.9 trillion in revenue, $500 billion more than we were spending just pre-COVID. So in other words, if we had kept spending flat pre-COVID, we would be putting towards debt reduction a surplus of $500 billion with the current tax revenue coming in at $4.9 trillion. The problem is we have spent over $6 trillion the last couple of years in the Biden administration, and now he wants to take it to nearly $7 trillion. We're not going to allow that to happen. We are the responsible ones as the Republican Party, led by the House Freedom Caucus, that we're going to bring fiscal sanity to this country. And you have to wonder, is the president economically illiterate? Is he fiscally illiterate? Or does he just intentionally want to further harm the country with the spending that he's bringing or proposes to bring with this new budget? But what are we going to do? We're going to cut back non-discretionary defense spending to pre-COVID levels. That'll save us nearly $150 billion a year. And then when you project that out, as others have said, it's going to be somewhere around $1.5 trillion just from that over the next 10 years. But more than that, clawing back the $400 billion student loan transfer scheme, where borrowers who did not incur that, or those who did not incur that debt, the president's trying to put on the hook for that student loan debt that's been borrowed. We're going to rescind the $80 billion to fund the 87,000 IRS agents that are intended to harass and intimidate and threaten more Americans to try to collect more than the $4.9 trillion record amount of revenue that's already coming in. We're going to end, as my colleagues have said, all of the woke environmental climate extremism. There's tens of billions of dollars between the phony infrastructure bill, the $1.2 trillion that was about 10% for real infrastructure. Most of it was for green raw deal funding, along with the 1.7 omnibus spending, and along with the phony inflation increase bill. All of that has hundreds of billions of dollars of woke environmental climate extremism funding in it. We're going to claw that back, as others have said, about $100 billion of unobligated, unspent COVID relief funds. The pandemic is over. Every other day, the administration says it's over, but of course, then they want to continue policies based on the pandemic. But the last thing I'll just add is we're going to get Americans back to work. We're going to end the policies that have expanded Medicare, Medicaid, expanded food stamps, expanded unemployment, expanded housing subsistence with no work requirements. Those have been stripped away in the name of the virus. We're going to reinstate those work requirements, which will get us about $30 billion a year in savings, but more importantly, help us do what we're here to do, which is to shrink Washington and grow America again. And I'm proud to stand with my colleagues here. And now I'd like to introduce Mr. Michael Cloud from Texas.
Yeah, thanks for being here today. We are at a critical time in our nation. One of the biggest national security issues we are facing right now is the fiscal status of this nation. We're at a time where other nations are trying to challenge us as a world reserve currency. And in this context, Joe Biden puts out a budget that doubles down on the drunk government binge spending practices that we have put us in this very position. And ultimately, here's the principles at stake. Biden's budget massively grows the federal government on the backs of the American people, and he called it investing in America. And this is the fundamental difference between the left's approach and the approach we're proposing today, where we understand that America isn't the government, America is we the people. And so we are putting forth a proposal that will get get the government off the backs of the American people. We understand that America is not a government with a people. We are a people with a limited government. And so we propose savings to the American people that will get us back to the business of governing and empower the Americans to do their best work. And so there's a number of places we can cut immediately that our colleagues have talked about today. Rescinding unspent COVID funds, getting the IRS expansion off the backs of the American people, and going forward, we're going to stop spending money to do things that they shouldn't be doing. Stop spending these agencies money to do bad things. We send them money, and for example, on the border, assuming they're going to secure the border, but they don't. They instead participate in the cartels and a human trafficking organization. That kind of bad activity has got to stop. And just in the hearings this week, we've seen agency after agency after agency that is supposed to be working for we the people have instead been working against the people, from the DOJ, controlling evidence to target political opponents, from the FBI that has worked to silence Americans, to the agencies that were supposed to be managing COVID, instead controlling information in a way that literally led to harm and even deaths of the American people. And so we've got to get this government back to the business of governing. We're here to restore the power to the people, to give them back a government of, by, and for the people, and instead of a woke and a weaponized government that's working against the people that the left has given us. We're ready to meet the debt and deficit challenges that are facing us today, and we will do it when we shrink Washington and we grow America. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Okay.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. My name is Andy Biggs from Arizona's 5th Congressional District. In Washington, D.C., there are very few pockets of people who view the world as reality, who understand what's really happening. We see in the Biden budget and the reports from the media about it really what the American people just simply cannot believe. I mean, I want you to think about this. Only in America can a president who is increasing the national debt from $31.5 trillion to $49 trillion, can he come out and the media say, we're reducing the national debt? Only in Washington, D.C., because basically in Arizona they're saying, what? I'm going to go into my boss. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to save you some money. I've been making 120. Raise it to 175. You'll save money. That's what we're facing today in Washington, D.C. Every agency, department, program, if you look at it, is getting an increase in funding. $800 billion? No, it's going to be more than that. Do you really believe that the 10-year projection that says it's only going to be a $17 trillion national debt increase is really accurate? Neither do I. Neither do I. So it's got to stop. It's got to stop in one way. What if we in Congress, this body, the Freedom Caucus, what if we said we're going to devise a plan that would simply say we're not going to add to the debt every month. We're not going to add $120 billion to the national structural, the structural deficit every month, which then goes into the national debt. What if we did that just for a year? The plan that has been outlined by the chairman and my colleagues, it gets to a large portion of that, $900 billion. And there are additional cuts that could be made. One of my favorites is the Biden administration, and I love the way they couch it. Joe Biden's historic international climate change policy. That's $12 billion going offshore. That has nothing to do with putting the American people first. It has everything to do with putting us last. And it isn't this generation that's going to pay for it. It's our kids and our grandchildren and future generations. If you want to save America, you have to shrink Washington. Yes. You must attack the bureaucracy. The fourth branch of government is making laws, enacting laws, and punishing people without congressional authority. There are over 1,200 unauthorized departments, agencies, and programs drawing $500 billion a year of funding. Yeah. That must end. Yes. Yeah. That must end. Ladies and gentlemen, this plan put forth by the Freedom Caucus today is a blueprint, a baseline. It should not be the end all. It is the baseline of shrinking Washington and not just growing America, but doggone it, saving America. Yes. That's what this is about. I'm grateful to stand with these good men and women, patriots all, who understand this. And we're going to go forward. And we urge our colleagues to join us. We beg you to join us. We have to shrink Washington and save America. With that, I'm pleased to throw to my good friends from South Carolina, Mr. Ralph Norman.
Thank you, Andy. I'm proud to stand with my true patriots up here, the Freedom Caucus. What we fought for in January was to save this country. At the center of it was a balanced budget. Folks, when I saw the outline of President Biden's budget, is a complete joke. Y'all ought to be outraged over some of the things that he had in there and some of the things that are coming down the pipe. You know what's at stake? Every dollar of yours. Every dollar of yours. The American people do not deserve total confiscation by the government. Where can you find a country that on capital gains is doubling it? Where can you find a country that on unrealized gain, they're going to tax it? If you make $100 in the stock market, whether you sell it or not, you're taxed. It makes no sense. The $1.7 trillion at Christmas time that the Senate handcuffed us till September was wrong. Folks, we're going to correct it. And this is what Scott proposed and everybody else up here is just the beginning. We're going to highlight for the American people and for each of you, line by line, what we're going to suggest needs to be taken out of government to free America, free the taxpayers. Because, folks, we're in charge. Thank God the taxpayers are standing up, and it's led by these members behind me. We're glad to do it. Are we going to take some errors? Yeah. What's interesting about Washington, D.C., every dollar that's spent has an advocate for it. That's why it's we're burdened with it. Folks, we're going to take it back to them. Instead of writing letters on dollars we want from the government, we're going to write letters on dollars that need to be cut. Yes. And it's going to balance the budget. It's going to get the people unleashed from the burdensome regulations. The farmers that Chip talked about that was put in jail for a puddle of water. The farmers that I know that are having to put a silt fence up every time they cut a road that's 20 feet long, a logging road. I mean, it makes no sense. Everything this administration has done has been intentional. And I've stopped asking the question, is Biden just illiterate? Does he not understand? The cabal that's running this country understands, and it's to destroy America. And folks, we've got people up here that are not going to take it. We're up here for a reason, and it's to get America, the America that we knew, back, and the things that made this country great. Capitalism. You keep your money, not government. All they're saying is let the government have your money. We're not doing it. And it's just a privilege. We can't say we're going to do it next year, the following year, 10 years from now. I'm tired of that. It's now. The end of the road is now. And we're going to face it, and we're going to fight. And I hope y'all will report the details as they come out, because we're not scared of the details. We're going to embrace them. And as Scott says, we're going to embrace freedom. We're going to embrace America. We're going to embrace the taxpayers that made this country great. With this, I turn it over to my great friend Byron Donalds from Florida.
Good morning, everybody. Look, first, to the American people who are actually watching this proposal in this press conference, let me first say to you that massive overspending by the federal government is what has made the price of eggs go up, the price of food go up, the price of services go up. It is what is shrinking your budget in your everyday life. For you reporters in this room, this is not just some story to cover. This is your pocketbook, too. Because when this government overspends massively, and you guys got incomes, you got rent to pay, you got to eat too, it makes your costs more expensive. And so the only thing that is responsible is for government to actually tighten its belt. Inflation is caused by massive overspending by the federal government. It has happened in every country at any time in world history, and it has happened here in the United States. And so the only way for America to grow is for Washington to shrink. It is the only way. To my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, I would ask them, come with your ideas, because the Freedom Caucus has their ideas. We all have to do this together in order to get the country in a position where it can thrive and the country can succeed and the American people can succeed. To President Biden, your budget is dead on arrival. Let me just go ahead and say that now. If you think that raising corporate income taxes to 28%, which is higher than it is in China, puts America first, you are lying to yourself and you're lying to the American people. Making our taxes more prohibitive than taxes in China only drives investment to China. It doesn't help us here in the United States. It only drives jobs to China. It doesn't help hardworking Americans here in the United States. If you really think that raising taxes on energy production helps the American people, go talk to a single mom in New York City about her Con Edison bill as it goes up month after month after month. Folks, we're serious. There has to be serious plans for curtailing Washington's spending. And the simple thing we're saying is, why don't we just go back to pre-COVID spending levels? That's pretty simple. COVID is over. The president's finally acknowledged that. Took him a year and a half, but he finally acknowledged it. It is over. We got to get our fiscal house in order again. That's not just so we can pat ourselves on the back here in Washington, D.C. It's so that the purchasing power of every American, rich or poor, black or white, Republican or Democrat, is not taken away from them because of bureaucrats and politicians who would rather just get trophies to their legacy here on Capitol Hill. Those days are over. It's time to get serious. So I would ask my colleagues, come with your proposals. Let's discuss them. Let's go through them. But we got one job on Capitol Hill, and that is to preserve the wealth, the prosperity, and the growth of America. With that, I yield. Is Clyde here?
He's not here, so we're going to start.
So I'm going to yield back to the chairman.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. Look, kind of the theme, among other things, is that you can't keep doing the same things under the same conditions and expect a different outcome. Quite honestly, we probably didn't expect much different from President Biden. We were certainly hopeful, but we've got record high inflation. And you know, a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, we were spending about $4.5 trillion. Post-COVID, six plus trillion. I mean, COVID's over. It seems pretty simple and obvious that we can live within our means here, but he refuses to. So these are serious folks. We've got a serious proposal. We urge our colleagues on the Republican side and the Democrat side to come along. If you don't like what we've offered, God bless you, that's fine. What have you got to offer? But we came here. You're elected to come here and fight for the American people, not fight for this town. Too many times we're told that we're investing in America. No. President Biden and Democrats have been investing in Washington, D.C. This is a plan about investing in America. So we're going to shrink Washington so that we can grow America. What are your questions? Sir.
Under the math, the balance in 10 years, you get $16 trillion in cuts. This is free. Is this more of like a first step towards that goal of balancing the budget?
This is the Freedom Caucus. So this is what we're willing to do with what's happening right now. And what we're talking about, let's be clear, if you save this money right now, up front, every month's about $100 billion. We can just extend this, and we can get to the point where we're doing our appropriations. We can unpack every single line item and then right-size this government so it actually supports the American people, and we can send that to President Biden. That's what we're talking about here, responsibly and changing the trajectory, changing the way things are done in Washington, not waiting till the last minute and then say, hey, everybody's got to get in a corner and vote for something terrible or else. We're here now. We're ready to start today, voting on things today. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Is there any part of this plan that you'd be willing to compromise given the unlikelihood that you'll get the majority of your colleagues to agree with you, and how can you have those conversations to get people to listen to you?
This is our plan. If somebody else wants to bring something else, we're willing to look at it. But I will tell you, the plan that President Biden brought to us or showed to the American people, that's not happening. That is not happening. So this is our plan. If somebody else on our side of the aisle or the other side of the aisle or a combination of the two wants to bring some plan together, we're certainly going to consider it. But this is where we stand. This is where we stand. And these are members that have not voted for debt ceiling increases. We didn't come here to bankrupt the country, ma'am. Right. Came here to fix this.
Scott, can I add just one thing?
Absolutely.
Just to the point of like, well, what aren't we going to get in it? I mean, what's objectionable? We're talking about returning the bureaucracy to pre-COVID levels. We've already covered that, right? That's where it ought to be. And that's still a big bureaucracy. Right? Number two, we're talking about going and getting $91 billion of unobligated COVID money that's just sitting there. We just spent trillions of dollars of COVID money. Like, literally, go follow the money. That's your all's job. Where's that money going? It's sitting in all sorts of accounts throughout this government and state governments. We just want to go get $91 billion that's just sitting there. What about the IRS money? The IRS, when you have agents, they are more likely, 3 to 5 times more likely to target poor people and minorities than rich people. You're going to go give power to the IRS to go after the American people, to go raise $100 billion, according to the CBO. You're basically paying $100 billion to get $100 billion, and that's not even going to happen. You're increasing the bureaucracy. So again, what's objectionable? What's objectionable about saying, hey, why are we going to go subsidize the kid who's got a sociology degree in a basement? He went to a rich white kid who went to an elite school, and the plumber down the street didn't take the student loan, and we're going to go pay that off? No, we're not going to do that. None of that's objectionable, and it is step one of many steps we got to do to get our house in order.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Do you agree with both Donald Trump and Kevin McCarthy's position that entitlements, Medicare, and Social Security should not be on the table for cuts? And is it possible to balance the budget in 10 years?
So as I've laid out in the proposal, all right, the benefits under Social Security and Medicare are not going to be cut. And yes, absolutely, we can balance them. Part of it is growing America. That's the other part of this equation. Right now, with inflation happening the way it is, this anemic growth that we've seen under this president is contributing to this cause. Go back just a couple years ago, we had record growth in America. It's possible, but it comes with policies. Sir.
Congressman, do you expect to write and release a bill along the lines of the plan that you've outlined?
Some of these bills are already out there. The REINS Act is already available. We should have that on the schedule to vote on immediately. We get all this stuff is almost available almost immediately. We should be working on it right now. I believe that we should be voting soon so that we can go tell the American people, as we should, we've solved this problem. It's up to the Senate now and the president.
Just to be clear, if I can ask, how do you expect sequentially? How do you expect it to happen sequentially? In other words, you want all these bills passed and then a debt limit considered after that? And what kind of a...
We would accept that. We would accept that. Yes, ma'am.
Accept your proposition, sir. Can you help us understand the game plan moving forward for how you all will actually work on the leverage to get leadership to take these priorities into consideration?
We're not assuming that leadership is opposed to these things. As Mr. Roy from Texas said, what's objectionable here? These are all things that Republicans ran on in their primaries and in their general elections. We haven't picked anything that's outrageous. This is all reasonable stuff. So we're not assuming that the leadership's opposed to any of this. Sir.
Are you working on the Senate side as well?
Yes.
If McCarthy cuts the deal with Democrats, that leaves you guys out of it. Are you willing to...
Speaker McCarthy's not going to cut a deal with Democrats. Speaker McCarthy's not going to cut a deal with them.
On Medicaid, are there any changes that you want other than
Work requirements, right. We would like people to, and again, we're just talking about going to pre-COVID. This is not ancient history. Sir.
I'm sorry if I missed something, but where does defense spending fall in this plan?
So as I said, defense spending can remain flat. We're looking at non-defense discretionary, but we're looking at a top-line figure. We've got to look at everything, but generally speaking, we're looking at the 30% growth in non-defense discretionary as the immediate target.
And to say that America won't default unless President Biden decides that it should.
Right. Yes. That's right.
Are you putting default on the table?
No, we're not putting default on the table. He is. Do you want to address that, Chip?
Yeah, look, the president has the tools and is required to do his job and make sure that we pay our obligations. We have the revenue to pay our obligations. It's a false threat. If he defaults, it's on him. He would be choosing to. We're putting forward a path forward to be able to say, if we want to actually have a conversation about what we're doing about the debt ceiling, then we're going to make these changes now because the American people expect us to. If the president's unwilling to sit at the table and wants to play Russian roulette with the obligations of this country, that's on the president of the United States. And on defense spending, what we're talking about is capping at 2022 levels, right? That's what we're saying. But by doing that, we're saying you can return to the pre-COVID levels for the federal bureaucracy, for the non-defense, and then you can have defense spending wherever you want it. But let's be clear. There's a lot to cut over at the Pentagon. There's a lot of things that need to change over the Pentagon. And look, a lot of Republicans agree with that. We need more lethality and less wokeness at the Pentagon.
But just to be clear, if default becomes a danger, what you're saying is that you're not going to give in. It's going to be on President Biden to give in.
Here's a plan. Number one, here's a plan. And maybe even before that, the current revenue coming in ensures that we don't default, that we can't default as long as he pays the bills. So it is, as Mr. Roy said, it's a false claim. It's a scare tactic. We're not going to fall for it. But as important, we have a plan here. What is his plan? His plan is to tax people and raise the spending another $2 trillion. The American people have had enough, and their bills every single day, whether they can afford their car payment, their electric payment, their food payment, show that. All right, we're voting, so I got one more question. Lindsay.
Sorry, just quickly, which senators are you working with?
We're working with numerous senators. Yes, ma'am.
Two-part question. Is this an official Freedom Caucus position as endorsed by 80%? Is it 80%?
It is an official Freedom Caucus position. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Good job.
It's an official position.
Yes, it is.
It's official.